Thank you, everyone, for coming. It's possible, Ruben, that the topic is one that is scary in nature. Perhaps we prefer sometimes to avoid thinking about these questions, but they're essential questions to think about. And understanding suffering and tragedy according to Jewish tradition, which is specifically appropriate for this time of year. The period of time of Bein HaMetzarim, the period of time of the 3 weeks, is a time when Am Yisrael, our nation of Israel, we've experienced, unfortunately, significant tragedies. And there are even, whether they're halachot or customs, in terms of how people act during this time, people definitely take into account the time period. People avoid flying, certainly as we get closer towards the 9 days and towards Tisha B'Av. So there's definitely this element of suffering and tragedy as a focus during this time period. There are source sheets, if you don't have the source sheets over here. Okay. So we're going to begin actually with source number 1, which is taking a step backwards for a moment, and not tackling the question of why is there suffering and tragedy. We're gonna get into that question, but we're going to begin with a fascinating source from the Mesilat Yesharim. Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto writes in Mesilat Yesharim the following as source number 1. He's talking about why we must believe in Olam Haba. There must be a world to come, and he says the following: V'tira be'emet. If you look into it truthfully, shekvar lo yuchal shum bal seichel. Anyone with intelligence cannot believe shetachlit b'riyat adam hu matzavo b'olam hazeh. Cannot believe that the purpose of our being created is for our situation in this world. He says this, and it's a very depressing thought, but I'm just going to read it. What is the life of a person in this world? Who is a person who is true, happy and peaceful? The sameach v'shalev is important. I think there are people who are happy, but shalev is a level of comfort and ease and all good in this world. And then he quotes David HaMelech. We live 70 years. If we're strong, 80 years. V'rabam amal v'aven, and most of them are difficult and filled with trouble. Certainly David HaMelech, his life was very much that way. One story after another after another. And then the Moshe Chaim Luzzatto continues and says, V'kama minei tsar v'chalayim u'machavot tradot. We have pain, we have illness, we have suffering and difficulties. V'achar kalzot, and after all that, hamavet, we pass away. Echad minei elef, you won't find 1 in 1,000. Lo yamatzei sheir ba'ha'olam lo ha'anat v'shava amitit. That the life is filled with pleasures and real calm and comfort. V'gam hu, and even that person, ilu yagia l'mea shana kvar avar uvatal min olam. That person reaches 100 years old, and he's, as we call, over a bottle. He's not able to really be functional anymore. Thank you, everyone, for not picking up and leaving at this point in the shiur, because this is not exactly the way you want to start an uplifting, inspiring shiur. But the perspective that the Ramchal, and he says it in a very strong way. But why does he say it that way? Because he's trying to really drive home the point that we believe in a God. We believe in a good God. We believe in a loving God. And therefore, if you do believe in a good and loving God, there's really no way intellectually that you can then say it's all about what happens here. And that, I think, is something which we can all connect to. That having the perspective of there's something else, there's more beyond, that's something which is necessary within the framework of a loving and caring God. And it's just a good way to start out tonight. We're going to get to a point where we do talk about that in terms of trying to understand suffering and tragedy. But it was just an important background to have. Just keep in the back of your mind that we are people who are, whatever answers we give, even if they're answers for within the framework of this lifetime, there's always the backdrop of Olam Haba, and that this is one little piece of a much broader and complex puzzle than we're exactly aware of. With that, we're going to go to source number 2. Source number 2 is a really, really important conversation between Moshe Rabbeinu and God. I would even say a conversation that we don't completely understand, even after we talk about it tonight. It's very hard to understand, but certainly on a simple level, just reading the words, it's very hard to understand. I'm going to ask you to refrain from asking what in the world are they talking about, because we will dive into a lot of what they're talking about through the Gemara that's going to come afterwards.
Shouldn't we know? I mean, we read this like once a year.
Yeah, but I'm sure we read it. It's a good point. I think we read it once a year and we see it and we kind of gloss over it. It's in the wake of a lot of difficult things that have happened, the sin of the golden calf, and many other things that Moshe has already gone through as the leader of the Jewish people. Let's start from the beginning. Pasuk Yud Gimel. Va'ata imna matzati chen be'einecha. Moshe says to God, if I find favor in your eyes, hodi'eni na d'rachecha. Please explain your ways to me. Right? Moshe doesn't understand. They left Mitzrayim, all these great things were happening, now all these terrible things are happening. This is not even talking about fast forward to the end of Moshe's life and all the things that happen. Tell me your ways. Ve'eda'acha. I want to know you. Right? One of the challenging things about a relationship with God is the more you embrace Him, the more you make Him part of your life, the more you also want to understand Him. And there's a real challenge there. There's almost a catch-22 because I so want to understand this being that I feel so close to and love, and yet we don't understand fully. And Moshe said, I want to understand. Laman emtzachen be'einecha. He said, I want to be able to find favor with you. I want to be close with you. Ure'eh ki amcha hagoy hazeh. And I also, this nation is your people. We have to understand more. There's a lot that we don't understand. God says, Vayomer panay elechu v'hanichoti lach. My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. Okay? What exactly that means? We'll see. Vayomer elav, and then he said to him, right, hanachot yilach can also be, and I will lead you, but it's still, I'm not going to give you exactly what you want. Vayomer elav, im ein panecha holchim al talei mizeh. If your presence doesn't go with us, right? Don't send us from here. I'm scared. I need you as part of my life. And he's basically saying, I still need to understand more. Right? How will anyone know that you're pleased with me and with your people? Right? Right? That you're with us. Make us different than everybody else around the world. And he wants to say, we want to be close to you. We want to know more. Let us have that. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe. Okay? He says to Moshe, I will do what you have asked. Okay? I will do it. I know you by name. Vayomer. So Moshe says, show me your honor. Show me your glory. Vayomer, and God says, Ani avir kol tuvi al panecha. I will cause my goodness to pass in front of you. V'karati b'shem Hashem l'fanecha, v'chanoti et asher achor. I will give grace to those who I give grace. V'richamti et asher arachem. I will have compassion on those who I have compassion. Vayomer lo tuchal l'rot et panai. Right? But he said, you cannot see my face. Ki lo yir'ani adam v'chai. Because a man will not see my face and live. Vayomer Hashem, hinei makom iti. There's a place here, Nitzavta al Atzur, stand on this rock, v'hayab avur kvodi, as my glory passes you. V'samticha b'nikrat Atzur, v'zachoti kapai alecha ad avri. So he's basically saying, until I've passed you, right, I'm going to cover you with my hand, v'hastiroti et kapai, then I'm going to remove my hand, v'ra'iti et achorai. You'll see my back, u'panai le'yirau, you will not see my face. Okay? Anybody who reads this and says, oh, I understand exactly what this conversation was about, is really not being honest with themselves. There's a lot going on here. What is Moshe asking? What is God answering? What is Moshe doing? How is this all working? With this, turn the page to the bottom, back of the first page, page number 2. An amazing Gemara in Masechet Brachot, Daf Zayin Amud Aleph. An amazing Gemara. And stick with me as we go through the Gemara. Stick with me because we're going to really get to the end of the Gemara, which is important. Amar Rav Yochanan Mishum Rav Yossi. Shlosha dvarim bikesh Moshe lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In this conversation here, that we just read about, there are 3 things that Moshe asked from God. V'natan lo, and God gave him all 3. Bikesh atishra shechina al Yisrael. He asked that God's presence should rest on the people of Israel, v'natan lo, and God gave him that. Shenemar halo b'lechtecha imanu, and I'll be with you when we walk. Bikesh shelo tishra shekhinah lo b'kochavim. He asked that the presence of God should not rest on the idolaters, v'natan lo, and he gave it to him. Shenemar, as it says, v'niflinu ani v'yamecha. I'm going to make a separation between you and your nation and the rest of the world. Bikesh lahodio drachav shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He asked him to show him the ways of God, v'natan lo, and he gave it to him. Shenemar hodi'ini na drachecha. He asked to show me your ways, and God gave it to him. Amar lefanu ribono shalom. Now, this answer is not going to satisfy any of you whatsoever. Moshe said to God, this was the question, which is what we asked. B'nei ma yish tzadik v'tov lo. Why are there some righteous and they have a good life? Yish tzadik v'ralo. There are righteous people who have a bad life. Yish rasha v'tov lo. There are wicked people who have a good life. Yish rasha v'ralo. And there are evil people who have a bad life. It all seems to be so convoluted and without any clarity. If I could put the question in other terms, why do bad things happen to good people? Okay, that's kind of what he's asking. Amar lo. Okay, here it is, the big answer. What did God say to him? Amar lo, Moshe, tzaddik v'tov lo. If you see a righteous person and he's having a good life, he's a tzaddik ben tzaddik. He is a righteous person, the son of a righteous person. If you see a tzaddik v'ralo, if you see a righteous person and he's not having a good life, he's a tzaddik ben rasha. He's a righteous person, but the son of an evil person. Rasha v'tov lo. If you see an evil person and he's having a good life, he's a rasha ben tzaddik. He's the son of a righteous person. Rasha v'ralo, he's an evil person, he's having a bad life. Rasha ben rasha, he's a son of a wicked person. Now, first of all, that sounds so simple, but also it's just not what we see, right? And any of us who look at life and look at our world, we don't see it that way. But the Gemara challenges it differently. The Gemara says, Amar mar, tzaddik v'tov lo, tzaddik ben tzaddik, tzaddik v'ralo, tzaddik ben rasha. That's what you said? You said that it depends on who the father was? Aini, is that so? V'hakti, but it says, Poked avod avot al banim. It says, Uvanim lo yumtu al avot. It says that it's not going to happen, that children are not going to suffer because of what their fathers did. V'raminan krai ahadadi. And we asked that contradiction. Umeshaninan, we already answered. Lo kasha. It's not a question. Hakish ochzin maseh avotehem biyadehem. If somebody continues in their father's ways, then he's okay. If they didn't continue, then it's not okay. Meaning a completely different measure. It's based on how people are acting in their lives. So we're still stuck with the question. This is what he meant to say. Tzaddik v'tovlo, if you see a tzaddik that he's having a good life, tzaddik gamor, he's a complete tzaddik. Tzaddik v'ralo, tzaddik she'eno gamor. It means that he has flaws. Rasha v'tovlo, if you see a Rasha who's having a good life, Rasha she'eno gamor. He's not a complete evil person. Rasha v'ravlo, if it's a Rasha who's having a bad life, Rasha gamor, he's a total Rasha. We're going to now push all of that aside. Because upliga de Rabbi Meir. This is all arguing with Rabbi Meir. To Amar Rabbi Meir, what did Rabbi Meir say? Shtayim not lulo. God only answered 2 of Moshe's requests. The achat, and one of Moshe's requests, lo not malo. God did not answer Moshe's request to understand the ways of God. Moshe wanted to know, why do tzaddikim suffer? And Moshe wanted to know, why do Rishayim prosper? But God didn't answer him. Shenemar, v'chanotir asher achol. I have grace on those who I give grace to, afal pi she'eino hagun, even though you might think they're not worthy. V'richamtir asher achem. I have compassion on those who I have compassion, afal pi she'eino hagun, even though it might not be worthy of it. We cannot understand. We cannot understand God's ways. That is what God is telling Moshe Rabbeinu. However, there was a little bit of a caveat at the end. What does it say? Shmot Lama Gimel Chav Gimel, right at the end of that. V'hasiroti et kapai, but I will remove my hand. V'ra'ita et achora, you'll see my back. Amar Rav Chana bar Bizna, Amar Rav Shimon Chasida, Melamed, what does that mean? I'll see my back. Shehera HaKadosh Baruch Hu L'Moshe, Kesher Shel Tfilin. He showed Moshe Rabbeinu the knot of his tefillin. Just put aside for a moment, God wears tefillin, God is not physical. The Gemara mentioned earlier, God as it is, as it were, wears tefillin. It's all symbolic in nature, but things that we can learn from. But what does it mean when God said, he showed Moshe at the back of his tefillin? I once heard a beautiful, beautiful explanation. I don't remember from who. So whoever you are, I apologize, but it's brilliant. And he said, if you look at the knot on the back of tefillin, and you don't know anything else about it, what do you see? You see two straps coming down, this knot that's formed, this chaos, and then you see two straps going forward, and you see nothing else. It looks like chaos. It looks like nothing. If you go to the front, you'll see that all of that is holding up the tefillin shel rosh. God said to Moshe, you're going to see my back of the tefillin. From the back, it looks like a mess. And that's what Olam Hazeh looks like, a mess. But at some point in time, when you can see the front, now you can't see that. You will see that it's holding up the tefillin shel rosh. And it's all to perfection. For some reason, okay, it's on. Just to be very clear, every answer that we're giving right now is not an answer that's going to sit with you well emotionally. So we're almost talking just on a brain level. Intellectual answers that are given to, right, the emotional, we have to keep in mind what I just said before, which is the time will come. And that's a really important perspective to have. I had my grandmother, Aleha Shalom, who survived the Holocaust and all kinds of other suffering in her life. When I sat with her and I talked to her, and I saw her that she still davened every day, and she still read her Tehillim, and she still learned her Tzena Arena on the Parsha. I asked her, how do you have the strength to do that? And she was very clear. She said, I'm not going to throw off. I have lots of questions, she said. I'm not going to throw off what my parents and grandparents taught and a tradition of thousands of years. But then she said, when I get up there, do I have questions for him? And I think that's a good way of framing it as well. Right? And that's what God is saying. God is saying the answers will come, we just don't have them now. So emotionally, I don't think it's going to sit with us. And you'll be able to say, oh, now I got it. It all makes sense. No, there's a question mark that's there. And it's okay to live our lives with a question mark about a God who's not a superhuman being, but he's beyond space, he's beyond time, he's beyond our comprehension. And we have to accept certain things, even if we can't completely sit with them emotionally. With that, answer or explanation number one is what's called midah keneged midah. There's an idea that God functions in the world measure for measure, and we're going to run through a few sources now which actually begin showing God communicating measure for measure. It's not somebody who's suffering per se, measure for measure, but God is helping them connect the dots with measure for measure. Let's start. Source number 4, Moshe Rabbeinu is describing how he begs God to enter the land of Israel. Vayisaber Hashem bi l'manchem. God was angry with me. Okay, l'manchem is often because of you, right? I'm suffering, not entering Israel because of you, Am Yisrael. V'lo shama elai. He wouldn't listen to me. Vayomer Hashem elai. God said to me, Ravlach, it's enough. Al tosef daber elai obadavar hazeh. Stop talking to me about this topic. And the Mefarshim commentaries explain, Moshe prayed 515 times, Gematria Vatchanan, and he did it one more time, God would have to listen, whatever that is all about. God told him it's enough. You're not entering Israel, there's no more hope for that. Source number 5 is going back to Parshat Korach. What does Moshe say? Zot asu. This is what you should do when the Korach and his colleagues rebelled. Chulachem machtot. Korach v'kol adato. He asked them to take the frying pans, and they're going to tubahen eish, give a fire. Simalei ketoras, you're going to offer an incense lifnei Hashem. Machar v'haya ha'ish ayishir yivchar Hashem hu hakadosh. Whichever incense God chooses, will know He's the one who's holy and right. Rav lachem b'nei Levi. It's enough already with you, children of Levi. Says the Gemara in Masechet Sota, source number 6. Vayomer Hashem elai Ravlach, Amar Rav Levi. Berav biser, berav bisruhu. Berav biser, rav lachem, berav bisru, rav lach. Moshe initially got angry and said to the people of Korach, Rav lachem, when he's not being allowed into the land of Israel, God actually hints to him that there's a primary reason, which is the sin that we just read about, but there's something else here. You got angry at the Jewish people, and you've had enough with them. I don't know if he's blaming him per se, but he's connecting the dots. You said to them, enough already? People of Levi? That is bringing these two together, and that's this Mida Kineged Mida, says Rashi, source 7, Barav Biser, et Nebach Lachato, Rav Lechem B'nei Levi, V'HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and God, this is really important, Medakdek im tzadikim kachut hasara. Are you kidding me? Moshe says Rav Lachem, and he's punished for that, but God is very, very precise with the most righteous, like a hair's breadth, V'ne'enash be'ota midah. And when he was punished, it was with that same measure. God was communicating to Moshe. He never even said it straight out. He just used that word Ravlach, and all of a sudden, the expectation, I think, was that Moshe would say, God is saying enough to me? Enough. Enough. And that would bring him back, and he understands that this is partially connected to what happened with Korach. Another example of that, source number 8, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, Hein, behold, Karvu yamecha lamut. Your days to die are coming close. Krat Yehoshua, call Yehoshua. He doesn't move on Moed. He just stands in the Ohel Moed, the Mishkan. Ba'atzavenu, I'll command him. Vayelach Moshe Yehoshua. Moshe is giving over. The beginning of the process, giving over the leadership. Hey, source number 9. When God is talking to Moshe and telling him to go to Egypt and redeem the Jewish people, Vayan Moshe Vayomer. Moshe answered and said, Vehein lo ya'aminu li. Behold, they are not going to believe me. The Jewish people won't listen to me. Ki yomru, they'll say, Lo nira elecha Hashem. Hashem did not appear to you. Okay? The Medrash in Devarim Rabbah, source number 10 says, Amar LaMoshe Kadosh Baruch Hu, Vahein kalasticha. With the word Hain, I praised you. Shenemar, Hain laHashem elokecha shamayim. I said, behold, God, your Lord, your God is in heaven. And you're using that word Hain while telling me that I'm going to die? In source number 9, God says to him, Zachor Masha Amarta. Remember, one time you used that word Vehain, Masha Amarta Vehain Le'yaminu li. You said the Jewish people won't believe me. By the way, notice both of those sources are Moshe having trouble with Am Yisrael. There was this level of the time came where entering Israel, there had to be a new leader because Moshe had reached the boiling point, or the point where he could not effectively really believe in them anymore. By the way, that's part of the, and again, I'm always very hesitant as I talk about it, what we call the chet of Moshe Rabbeinu, again, Sadiq Kachut HaSe'ara, but he didn't believe the Jewish people were worthy of the miracle that God was telling him to perform. So this is a common thread, but again, just notice the Ravlach, Rav Lachem, the Hain, God communicating with Moshe measure for measure. It's not a precise example of what we're talking about, but now we'll get to more of that. Now we're going to go back to Yosef. Yosef's story. Source number 11, top of page 4. What does the Torah say? Eila Todot Yaakov ben Yosef ben Shva'as Rishana, beginning of Parshat Vayeshev. Ben Shva'as Rishana Haya. He was 17 years old. Ro'eh et Achav. He was a shepherd with his brothers, Batzon, V'hunar. He was a young man at Bnei Bilhah, at Bnei Zilpah. He was with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, the concubines, the She'aviv, who also Yaakov married. Vayaveh Yosef et dibatam ra'al avihem. Yosef brought evil tidings about his brothers to his father. That's the pasuk. Says Rashi, Kol ra'ah, in source number 12, Kol ra'ah shahaya ra'eh. Every single thing bad that Yosef saw be'achav b'nei Leah, everything bad that he saw in his sons, the sons of Leah, in his brothers, sons of Leah, haya magid la'aviv. He would tell his father. Number 1, and by the way, there's a lot of discussion in the commentaries about exactly why were the sons doing these sins, how did Yosef misunderstand. We're not going to get into all of that right now, so we're just going to read it at face value. Shahayu ochlin ever min achai. They were eating the ever min achai. They were eating the limbs of a live animal. I apologize, by the way, this word at the end here is in the wrong place. Mezalzelim b'nei hashfachot, continue the next line. They were making fun of the children of the maids, Lakotan Avadim. They were calling them slaves. He was calling the sons of Bilhah and Zilhah slaves. V'chashudim al rayot. And he said, I suspect them in immorality, sexual immorality. 3 things that Yosef charged that his brothers were doing wrong. He says, Rashi, uveshloshtem laka. And he was punished for all 3. Al ever minachai, for saying that they were eating the limbs of an animal live. Vayishchatu sir izim, when they sold Yosef, they slaughtered a goat, and velo achlu chai, and they didn't eat it, the goat, live. Kidei sheyilka b'shchita. V'al diba shesiper aleim shekor lachem avadim, because he called them slaves. He said they called them slaves. Le'eved nimkar Yosef. Yosef was sold as a slave. V'al ha'arayot, and because he said that they were being promiscuous, shesiper aleim, batisha eshet adonav, he had the whole challenge with the wife of Potiphar. What this is saying is that Yosef experienced challenges in his life, and at each one of those, this is not just semantics. He was supposed to think to himself, why is this happening? Why is this happening? And trying to think in his life, could there be some kind of a measure for measure here in what I'm doing, that God is punishing me in this area? And by the way, this is the Gemara talks about, we'll see in a moment, the way a person's supposed to initially think when you're going through something, not to beat yourself over the head, but to try to take it as perhaps a wake-up call. Maybe there's an area where I can improve. The Gemara in Ketuvot, in source number 13, takes this further. Amar Rav Yosef, v'chein tani Rav Chia, miyom shachar Beit HaMikdash, from the day that Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, alfal pisha bitlu Sanhedrin, even though we no longer have a Jewish court, arba mitot lo batlu. The capital punishment has not been taken away. Meaning, no one gives someone capital punishment, no one is convicted of a capital crime, but things still do happen, which can be capital punishment. I'm just going to give a very personal example. When I was in yeshiva in Baltimore, I was in a terrible car accident. I was in this little tiny compact car, which was in a collision with a tractor trailer. The car was completely totaled, and thank God we emerged unscathed. Now we're talking about a car pre-airbags, unscathed. And we were very shaken by it. It was myself and one other friend, my roommate, and we sat with my Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg Zatzal, who was not a Kabbalistic type of rabbi. He was not a Hasidic Rebbe, very intellectual. Rambam was his go-to sefer. And we asked him, like, what are we supposed to do with this? It was a big shakeup. And he said to us that he firmly believes that a car accident, especially the way we describe what happened, he believes that's skila. Okay, that's stoning, the capital punishment of stoning. And he said, if you look, the primary avera for stoning, for skila, is Shabbos, Shabbat. And he said, each one of you should take a step back, relearn Hilchot Shabbat, and even if you don't notice something that you're doing wrong, strengthen your connection to Shabbat, and that's what we did. And that's an example of this idea. The Gemara says there's capital punishment. If something happens and it feels like something is shaking you up, to try to do a little bit of reflection and figure out what is that all about. The Gemara goes even further with this. In source number 14, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Dam Nikuf, okay, if you have a wound, okay, with blood coming out, Martze Kadam Ola, it atones for you like the blood of the Korban Ola. Amar, and then Rabbi gets very specific. This is one of these Gemaras where we really don't understand. Begudal Yamin, it's talking about if it's a wound on your right thumb. Uvanikuf Sheni, and it's a second wound. V'huda Kazil Dvar Mitzvah, and it happened while you were on the way to a mitzvah. Then it's a Korban Ola. Let's put aside what this Gemara means. The point of the Gemara, though, is when things happen to us, instead of just the initial emotional reaction and then the medical treatment, there is a spiritual side as well of, let me try to think about, maybe there's some kind of a message, maybe there's something which I can do to try to be better. It's not simple. It's not something which is the easiest thing to do, but this is definitely level number 1 when we talk about trying to understand, there is this idea of messages coming to us, and hopefully we can try to internalize them and grow from them. But for most people, and I think an easier level, I'm not negating this level, I think we should all do it, is the next part that we're going to go to right now. Source number 15, Gemara in Shabbat. We're going to go through two Gemaras, which are going to contradict each other, and the answer is going to lead us towards our next point. Amar Rabbi Shiur ben Levi, called Dibur v'Dibur, Sheyatza b'pi HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when the Jewish people were standing at Har Sinai, every single word that came out of God's quote-unquote mouth, Yatzta nishmatan shel Yisrael, the Jewish people lost their souls. Shenemar nafshi yatsa b'dabro, they lost their souls, they couldn't handle it when God started telling them the 10 Commandments. If they lost their souls after the first commandment, how did they get to the second one? Dibur sheni heyach kiblu. How did that happen? Hori tal, God brought down some dew, shatid lachyot be'beitim, which he'll eventually use to resurrect the dead, v'hechi otam, and he resurrected them. That's what the Gemara says. It was so overwhelming to hear God's voice, so to speak, and they couldn't handle it. Says source number 16, the Psikta Deras Kahana, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Kishay haya medaber kol echad ve'echad miYisrael, haya omer, imi hadavar medaber. When God was speaking to the Jewish people, every single Jew was saying to themselves, oh, God is speaking to me. Okay, Anochi Hashem Elokeichem ein ktivkan. Doesn't say I'm your God, your Lord in plural. Ela Anochi Hashem Elokecha. It's in singular. I am your individual God. Amar Rav Yossi bar Chanina. More than that, the fikochan shakol echad ve'echad haya hadibur medaberim more. God spoke to each one of them according to their level and their ability. We have a contradiction. On the one hand, we said with every single word that came from God, they couldn't handle it, and their souls passed on. They passed out. On the other hand, it's saying they were spoken, each one to their own level. Now, we can have contradictory statements of Chazal. That's okay. But Rav Zev Lef gives an absolutely beautiful explanation to reconcile this contradiction. And he says, when it says that God spoke to each person on their level, it was their potential. It was where they were capable of reaching. Chalkeinu b'toratecha, we each have our own portion where they could be. When the people saw the gap that existed between who they were and who God expected them to be, they passed out. It was too much. It was too overwhelming to realize that's what you're expecting from me. They couldn't handle it. And this is this idea which the Musar movement talks about all the time, about how we fail to reach our potential. We don't even realize the potential that we have. By the way, just parenthetically, when I was in yeshiva, we were coming home from college one night, and we heard an advertisement on the radio. You can improve your memory by 500% if you order these cassette tapes. And we decided, we were yeshiva guys, we want to remember everything we learned. We ordered them. There was a money back, Garrett, you can send it back within 30 days and get your money back. We ordered the tapes, and we started listening to them. And I understand the concept. The tape that basically said was, anything that you want to remember, you have to take the time and make it as real and crazy and memorable as possible. Vivid, and make it extreme in nature. The same way we tend to remember things in our lives, which are overly traumatic or just out of the blue, something crazy. Do that with every single line of Gemara that you learn, every single name that you want to remember, you'll remember it. And we were just too lazy to do that, so we sent the tapes back. I got our money back, but that's the same thing. I can do it, but it requires a lot of work, and it makes you actually, we don't realize our potential. This is both on an individual level and on a national level. Let's start on a national level, source number 17. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, or Yochanan said, Lama nimshal l'zayid, why the Jewish people compared to an olive? Lo malcha, tell us, ma zayid zed, just like this olive, ein motzi shmano ela aydek tisha, the only way to get the best byproduct of the olive oil out is by crushing it. Af Yisrael. So the Jewish people, ein chorzel mutav, they don't return to the good and reach their potential. Ela al yedei yisurim. It happens through national suffering. It happens through persecution. That's when we actually emerge at our best. And that's on a national level. that we as a Jewish people are unique in terms of that. But if you go to mankind for a moment, this is not unique to the Jewish people. It's every human being is this way. They have greater potential than they could possibly imagine, but it has to be brought out of them. The Gemara in Brachot in source number 18 calls this is the line for the night, Yisurin Shel Ahava. It's suffering, it's persecution, which feels like we're getting smacked down, and it's actually out of love. There's two different levels to how that can be out of love. The first one is to help you reach greater heights. And you don't have to mark my word for it. Let's go to Helen Keller, source number 19, where Helen Keller communicated the following message, right, after going through what she went through, and basically not being involved in the world, and then learning how to communicate. The marvelous richness of human experience would lose something of one rewarding joy if there were not limitations to overcome. The hilltop hour would not be half so wonderful if there were no dark alleys to traverse. We all know this if we really reflect on our lives, but it's very difficult when we're in the middle of it. But through the difficult things that we experience, we're able to get to even higher levels that we can even imagine. And one great example of this is Christopher Reeves in source number 20, a fantastic book that I recommend from Christopher Reeves. It's called Still Me, which is an amazing play on words. Still me, because he was a quadriplegic and he was not able to move, so he's completely still. And even so, he's still me. He's still the same person that he was, even though before he was Superman, and now he's not, but he's still me. And he writes that before his accident, before he fell off the horse, he said, if you would have asked him who is a hero, he would have talked about some really strong person who wins a weightlifting competition, or someone who's willing to jump out of an airplane, or whatever crazy adventure. That's a strong, that's a hero. And he says, now my definition is completely different. I think a hero is an ordinary individual who finds strength to persevere and endure in spite of overwhelming obstacles. These are the real heroes, and so are the families and friends who have stood by them. An amazing statement in general, but also he's expressing here a shift in how he grew through what he experienced. And he would have never, again, I'm not here to say, and therefore a terrible accident had to happen, which leads to all kinds of suffering. But if we're putting it into a God framework, for a person individually to look at it, you can see it in that way. But here are two people who said it very differently. Both athletes, you'll start to notice the motif of sports that sometimes comes into my Torah. Dennis Byrd was a defensive end for the New York Jets. Okay, if you follow football, professional football, a defensive end is a very, very big guy, and his job is to get by other big guys and tackle the quarterback. That's his job. He's playing in the Meadowlands on a Sunday afternoon, 90,000 people there, millions watching on TV. He has a straight line for the quarterback. He's young, he's in his prime, making millions of dollars. He leaves the ground, dives towards the quarterback. At the last moment, the quarterback ducked out of the way, and he went head first into another player on his team, fell to the turf, felt nothing, and knew at that moment that he broke his neck, and knew at that moment that he was going to be paralyzed. And he also wrote a book. I do not remember the name of the book right now. It might come to me as we continue. Also, very powerful book. But at the end, he says, people want to know if I ever ask why me? Right? Here you have a 20-something-year-old making millions of dollars. Do I ask why me? When I look back and remind myself of where I was only a matter of months ago, of where I was years ago, of all the blessings I've received in my life, with so much life still ahead of me, how can I ask why me? If I've learned anything from my experience, it's that the Lord is with us if we falter, He is with us if we fail, He is with us when we break, and He can help make us whole. I've also learned that all of life is a blessing. That realization has been the real miracle for me. So again, you have someone who's suffering immensely, and his whole life has been taken away from him and thrown onto another course, and yet he's able to say, I see it as a blessing. Dan Quisenberry was a relief pitcher for the Kansas City Royals. He had cancer, brain cancer. He suffered terribly. And he says the following: if I had to choose between having the cancer and learning all that I have learned, or not having the cancer and not learning these things, I would choose the cancer. Every day I find things to be thankful for. It's really wonderful. Sometimes it's just seeing a little boy on a bicycle. Sometimes it's the taste of water. Just that perspective. Again, I can't tell someone else to feel that, but he's telling us what he felt. He died from the brain cancer at a young age. But he said, I never in my life would have reached a point where I saw a little boy riding on a bicycle and enjoyed it. I never would have reached the point where a simple glass of water, the taste of the water is what he said. Notice, it wasn't water that had taste put into it. He got a new perspective because of where he was in his life. And this is something which I have seen with people who have suffered. They're able to see things in a whole new way and reach all new levels that they couldn't have reached before. So that's where we say Yisurin Shel Ahava, where it's not you were a bad person, it's not you deserve punishment, it's just we're here in this world to reach our potential, to reach a certain level, and through this crushing and through these experiences, we're able to reach that point. Finally, there's also the perspective of Yisurin Shel Ahava, where we don't even understand it in this lifetime. But there may be things that we have to atone for. There may be things that could somehow bring us to a much better Olam Haba. And the very suffering that we go through here, right, the expression, it should be a kapara. Right? That's what that means. We often use it for small things. I lost this, I can't find. But Begadol, in general, the Jewish thought says there is this concept of, even if we don't know why, it doesn't add up. It doesn't transform me into a new person. There's still the perspective of Olam Haba that we had before. And for this, I want to end, but it's a long source, but we're going to read it together. Rabbi Chana Wasserman was in the United States when World War II broke out. Everyone said stay. He's from Europe, and he was Rosh Yeshiva in Europe, and he was collecting money for his yeshiva. They said stay. He said, no, I'm going back to be with my students. There's a picture of him on the boat. As the boat is pulling away from a harbor in New York, you can almost see on his face that he knows what he's going back to. He knows it. But I'm going back to be with my students. He was with his students. The Nazis came, they rounded up his yeshiva, and they gunned them all down as a group. There was a student who survived. He was just, the way the students were falling, he was underneath other students who were killed. He said that before the shooting started, Rabbi Chanan said a bracha on dying al Kiddush Hashem, which I had never heard of before. He said the bracha, and they were all killed. But beforehand, the students were struggling. How is this all happening? How is this happening? All of this. I mean, we're yeshiva students, we're studying Torah, and all of this suffering. And Rav Chanan gave the following mashal, and it goes as follows. Once a man who knew nothing at all about agriculture came to a farmer and asked to be taught about farming. The farmer took him to his field and asked him what he saw. It's a beautiful field. I see a beautiful piece of land, lush with grass, pleasing to the eye. Then the visitor stood aghast while the farmer plowed under the grass and turned the beautiful green field into a mass of shallow brown ditches. Why did you ruin the field? He demanded. Be patient. You will see, said the farmer. The farmer then showed his guest a sack full of plump kernels of wheat and said, tell me what you see. The visitor described the nutritious, inviting grain, and then once more watched in shock as the farmer ruined something beautiful. This time he walked up and down the furrows and dropped kernels into the open ground wherever he went. Then he covered the kernels with clods of soil. Are you insane? The man demanded. First you destroyed the field, and then you ruined the grain? Be patient. You will see. Time went by, and once more the farmer took his guest out to the field. Now they saw endless straight rows of green stalks sprouting up from all the furrows. The visitor smiled broadly. I apologize. Now I understand what you were doing. You made the field more beautiful than ever. The art of farming is truly marvelous. No, said the farmer, we're not done. You must still be patient. More time went by, and the stalks were fully grown. The farmer came with a sickle and chopped them all down. as his visitor watched open-mouthed, seeing how the orderly field became an ugly scene of destruction. The farmer bound the fallen stalks into bundles, decorated the field with them. Later, he took the bundles to another area where he beat and crushed them until it became a mass of straw and loose kernels. Then he separated the kernels from the chaff, piled them up in a huge hill. Always he told his protesting visitor, "We're not done. You must be patient." The farmer came with his wagon, piled it high with grain, which he took to a mill. There the beautiful grain was ground into formless, choking dust. The visitor complained again, "You have taken the grain and transformed it into dirt." Again he was told to be patient. The farmer put the dust into sacks, took it back home, took some dust, mixed it with water, while his guests marveled at the foolishness of making whitish mud. And the farmer mashed the mud into the shape of a loaf. The visitor saw a perfectly formed loaf, smiled broadly, but his happiness did not last. The farmer kindled a fire in an oven and put the loaf into it. The farmer looked at him and laughed. "Have I not told you to be patient?" Finally, the farmer opened the oven and took out a freshly baked bread, crisp and brown with an aroma that made the visitor's mouth water. "Come," the farmer said. He led his guest to the kitchen table where he cut the bread and offered his now pleased visitor a literally buttered slice. "Now," the farmer said, "now you understand. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech ha'olam hamotzi lechem min ha'aretz." That bracha has a whole new meaning if you put it into this perspective. It's a bracha that not only reminds us that all comes from Hashem, but it reminds us that everything challenging that we go through life comes from Hashem. And somehow, at the end of the day, we'll see the front of the tefillin, and we'll see that it's holding up the tefillin shorosh. So let's go over what we spoke about tonight. We said that Moshe asked the question, and there is no answer. So the answer to tonight's shiur is, we don't know. Understanding it, we don't know. But we talked about midah keneged midah. We talked about measure for measure. Perhaps you can relate to what it's, where it's coming from. We talked about Yisurin Shel Ava, that God does this out of love on a national level. We as a people reach our potential through our suffering. Individuals become even greater as they overcome suffering. We talk about the next world. It could be kapara for the next world. There's a bigger picture we don't even know about. The Mesilat Yesharim we started with. By the way, we end davening, we say, Ein Kelokeinu. There's no one like our God. A few sentences later we say, Mi Kelokeinu, who's like our God? What is that all about? You just said there's none like our God. The bottom line is we say we believe in God. Ein Kelokeinu. But there's absolutely a place in our tradition for questions, for not understanding. Things aren't totally clear. And through our lifetime, we have to do the best that we can to overcome the hard things that come our way, to hopefully grow from the hard things that come our way, and see them within this bigger picture of what we don't understand. May all of us, B'ezrat Hashem, be blessed not to suffer in our lives and to be blessed with only good things, but we also know the nature of life is that challenging things come our way. May we have the strength, when those challenging things come our way, to remember the various things we talked about in tonight's shiur, hopefully to grow through the things that happen, but to also put it in the broader perspective of a loving, caring, good God who's behind everything and pulling all the strings, and one day, B'ezrat Hashem, we will see the front of those tefillin. I'm just going to turn it off. We'll take questions.